Day 7, the last day of Department 1's court case. Now reciting Judge Max, Judge Kayan.
You may be seated.
Well. It is the last day of one of the biggest trials in history. The last 8 days have been long, stressful, and very eventful. You gotta admit though, from day one, all we did was laugh. We laughed at the people who were thrown out, the mistakes, and everything else in between. Today is one of the biggest days in the history of the United States. The jury is going to reach a verdict in this case, and we are going to once and for all know the fate of Christopher Columbus.
Jury, please be reminded that the charges against Mr. Columbus are high-profile charges. He is not being charged for something small. He is being charged for genocide, rape, aiding and abetting, and theft. The charge, genocide. This is the killing of innocent, random people. We are talking about someone's life being taken away. People. An innocent human being. Rape is taking away someone's purity within a matter of minutes. A person can never take it back once it happens. As judges, we have noted that neither the defense or prosecution has talked about theft.
The defense and prosecution have done their job of proving whether or not Mr. Columbus is innocent or guilty. The prosecution did an exceptional job in providing evidence and relevant evidence, we might add. We would also like to take the time to thank and appreciate how prepared and on point the prosecution was every single day of trial. Defense, you had especially strong arguments and had very firm statements, although there were many points that were left unproven throughout the trial. We, the judges, were intrigued to see many points of your testaments were leading to a lot. We, the judges, were intrigued to see that many of your testaments were leading to a lot, but at the same time, a lot was also left uncovered. The main points presented by the prosecution were
that of the Sixth Amendment of the Ten Commandments followed by Catholics stating, "You shall not kill." The point made was that if Mr. Columbus was doing right by God and right by the religion of Catholicism, of which he claimed to follow, then how does the acts he had partaken in, the killings of the Arawak Indians and the gruesome murders he was a bystander to, how do those acts justify Catholicism in Mr. Columbus's life?
Another great point brought by the prosecution had to do with the lack of evidence on the defense's part. Unfortunately, because of this, the defense lost a large amount of time. The prosecution continuously demanded evidence of God himself giving Columbus permission to perform these acts of rape, genocide, and everything else Mr. Columbus is being charged by.
Some highlights of the arguments made by the defense was that there is no evidence that Columbus was at least the main leader who had partaken in these acts of rape he is being accused by. That brings up a controversy as to whether Columbus actually did kill or rape any of these Indians on the land.
Yesterday, the last full day of trial, Mr. Columbus became insane and was unable to complete questioning from the defense and the prosecution. We, the judges, would like to bring this point back up to the jury.
The prosecution has to come to court every day with a clear argument. We heard from a large amount of witnesses and heard the yell of many objections. The defense has also come to court every day with a great argument, but had a few speed bumps along the way.
Unfortunately, 2 days ago, the defense did not have an argument prepared. This resulted in losing a very important day in court and making more arguments to the jury. The questions asked by the defense were spot on every single time. Even though there were many objections, they still managed to get their point across.
At the end of the closing statements, the jury will be escorted out by the bailiff to a private place where they will talk about their opinions of this case. People of the jury, please remember that in a few minutes, the future of this case will depend on you.
And in the end, remember, Every year, we celebrate a certain day in October. People get the day off. Courts, banks, and libraries are closed. Everything is closed to celebrate one man. The man who is currently sitting in front of us today. A man who is a killer, a thief, and a pedophile.
Fine, jury.
And on that note, think, jury, you are the people deciding the fate of this man's life. Would you really want this man roaming the streets? Are both sides ready? Are both sides ready to begin their closing statements?
Yes.
Are both sides ready to begin their opening statements?
Closing.
I'm sorry, closing statements.
Prosecution. We have a PowerPoint that we would like to share with you.
Christopher, you have a closing statement.
Today we are going to be talking about our closing statements before the end of the trial. The counts filed against Columbus are aiding and abetting, which helps in the commission of many crimes, enslavement, which means like makes a person into a slave to do another's bidding, grand theft, taking control of land and property by others by force, rape, the crime of forcing another person to submit to sex acts such as intercourse, and genocide, the act of deliberately killing those of a specific ethnic group or nationality.
On the charge of aiding and abetting, there were many times in which Columbus allowed his crew on board to not only allow excessive acts, but to actually encourage them. On a log by one of his crew members, Miguel Cunha, he discussed in detail how he raped an Indian woman with Columbus's blessing. Because of his status as the highest authority on the ship, he felt that he could do as necessary without repercussion.
This is continuing on aiding and abetting for count one. Queen Isabella is the prime financial support that paid for Columbus's exhibition. If it weren't for her, Christopher Columbus would have never been able to set sail. But Columbus himself had to persuade the Queen to finance other trips, where the most criminal acts occurred, indeed putting him right in the center of helping in the commission of many crimes. Here are two documents that we have evidence. The highlighted red, or the red section is the main part. He said he was able to convince the Spanish crown to finance a second voyage of discovery and colonialization. He, Columbus, had persuaded the king and queen to finance an expedition to the lands. The wealth he expected would be on the other side of the Atlantic, Indies, and Asia, gold and spices. Columbus enslaved many different tribes in the Americas, making the people such as the Taínos the actual property of himself, his men, and Queen Isabella and her husband Fernando. He stated in Brazil in 1493 in a letter to the Pope that this island is to be desired and is very desirable, and not to be despised, in which, although, as I have said, I solemnly took possession of all the others for our most invincible king, clearly stating that it was he who had chosen to enslave the people of the new islands discovered. Another document states from Christopher Columbus in one of his journal entries, As soon as I reached sea, I seized by force several Indies on the first island. Now in the meantime, I had for certain Indies, whom I had seized there, that this country was indeed an island.
So I'm going to go over grand theft. So Christopher Columbus, we believe, is guilty of everything, including grand theft. He took men as slaves, women for sex, and their valuables and food. If you remember my interview with Joseph, who isn't here today, he was taken as a sex slave by Christopher Columbus and actually raped by Christopher Columbus, then left to give birth to her children alone. And it says here in a quote, "Their Highness may see that I shall give them as much gold as they need, and slaves as many as they shall order to be shipped." In this quote, that it shows that Christopher Columbus took both gold and people from the Taínos. And Christopher Columbus used the knowledge that the natives saw them as gods. He used this knowledge to get what he wanted and to manipulate them and deceive them. The next account is of rape. There's many accounts of Columbus and his men engaging in the sex trade and sexual acts with the natives. He was reported to contract syphilis, or as the defense states, a precursor of it, an STD acquired through sexual activity or kissing an open sore, the later of which has never been reported of him doing. This disease.
That's fine. The disease was reported to not have existed until 1494.
So in my interview during Joseph, we talked about him being raped by Christopher Columbus, and he started a sex trade, forcing women into it.
Columbus committed genocide on many different New World tribes, including but not limited to the Arawak Indians, the Mayans, the Pequot Indians, the Taino Indians, and the Tabasco Indians. Here are some documents that prove some of the genocide that he committed. One quote is him stating, "I had to fill ships returning to Spain with some kind of dividends in the year 1495. They, Columbus, meaning Columbus and his men, went on a great slave raid, rounded up 1,500 men, women, and children, put them in pens guarded by Spaniards and dogs." Another quote states, "Columbus was desperate to pay back the dividends to those who had invested and had to make good to fill the ships with gold. They, meaning Columbus and his men, ordered all persons 14 years of age or older to collect a certain quantity of gold every 3 months. When they did not comply with the gold, they were murdered in cold blood. In 2 years, through murder, mutilation, or suicide, half of the 250,000 Indians of Haiti were dead. By 1550, there were 500 left. A report for the year of 1650 shows none of the original Arawaks and their descendants left on the island, proving that he committed genocide on these Indians." Here's a quote from Samuel Eliot Morrison, a historian. "The cruel policy initiated by Columbus and pursued by his successors resulted in complete genocide." This is a quote from a man working for Columbus, Jennings. He stated, "The terror was real among the Indians." And lastly, a Dutch traveler in New Netherland wrote in 1656, "The Indians affirm that before the arrival of the Christians and before the smallpox broke out among them, they were 10 times as numerous as they are now, and that their population had been melted down, whereof 9/10 of them had died."
Okay, so over the duration of the trial, genocide took a large role and carried many heated discussions. If you remember Joseph's interview, his father and brother were killed by Christopher Columbus and his men. Or Amani's interview, when her and her people committed suicide through painless poisoning because it was better off than ending up like their friends and family, painfully tortured and murdered without pride or humanity by Christopher Columbus and his men. Christopher Columbus said that he was only doing God's will and following the proper rule. We brought up that you could not be killing the natives in the name of God because his word, the Bible, prohibits it. The defense was stating that he was only doing what the Pope said and that the Pope could speak to God. And so yesterday we brought up the Feast of Chestnuts, and why would God speak to like a weird man like the Pope who was having crazy, wild orgy, pervy, weirdo sex parties in a slasher holy house. I don't know if God's like a guy or girl or something, so I'm just like his/her. The defense will try to blame everything on others, the Queen, his crew, or the Pope. No one is without blame in this, not even Christopher Columbus himself. I know that the defense has always said, why can't we put the Queen on trial? Why can't we put his men on trial? Well, we can't. This is the trial of Christopher Columbus. Everyone is equally to blame here. Lots of people did bad things, but Christopher Columbus is guilty of doing bad things just like everyone else, and so that's why we are putting him on trial. I wish that we could put everyone on trial that did wrong, but we just can't.
So, I was going to go over the arguments against the men. So they said that it was more of the king and queen's fault. They're just following orders by the papal bulls. The defense also stated he had very few guidelines, meaning he could really do whatever he wanted. The queen and king never stated that Columbus was allowed to kill others. We actually found yesterday that this is a quote from Ford University. And it says, Columbus's arrogance and exploitation regarding slavery began on his second voyage. Ferdinand and Isabella had ordered that the natives be treated kindly. In opposition to this order, Columbus began exporting slaves in great numbers in 1494. So, if you pay attention to the red bolded part, that is our changing that. And also, if you remember the interview with Queen Isabella or the interview with the Pope, they never exactly said specifically to kill. Defense also stated that the papal bull was part of a corrupt government because we proved that they could have chestnuts and how the Pope was involved with that. So should the papal bull really be relevant? And the fact that Christopher Columbus had no supervision in the Americas. It took 8 months to sail from Europe to the Americas. So even just sending information back, that would take forever. There's also an argument that the defense brought up that the crimes against the natives were in the name of God. Well, if we remember the 10 Commandments, and one of the commandments being thou shalt not kill, that pretty much cancels out what Christopher Columbus did. And or the fact that it was in the name of God. The quote here says, the protested commandment of prohibition against murder rather than killing is a minor distinction. In the Bible, both Moses and Joshua killed many non-believers and were told to do so by God. And I'd like to point out that unless they actually had solid evidence that God himself said to Christopher Columbus that it was okay to kill the natives, and that wouldn't, then Christopher Columbus would be able to be innocent of, but he is not. And also, there's also a thing brought up, that they were just listening to the Pope, since they thought the Pope was like a true servant of God. But after the Ballad of Chestnuts, is he really? The quote here says, after the banquet, dishes had been cleared away. The city's 50 most beautiful courtesans danced with the guests. First full address, then naked. The dancing over the ballad began, with the Pope and 2 of his children in the best seats. The Pope was there, and he actually attended, and it was at the Vatican. And it was his son hosting the party, but the Pope could have done something about it. Instead, he just watched and laughed.
One of the other arguments of the defense uses is that Columbus had no control over his crewmen. A crewman member of his wrote of how Indian women are a reward for other crew members on the ship.
A quote states that Columbus and his men also used the Taino people as sex slaves. It was a common reward for Columbus's men for him to present them with local women to rape.
He was the foremost authority on that ship.
I found an article that states that on board a merchant ship, the master had total control of the ship. The men had to follow his orders even if they did not agree with them. If a sailor did not do his work in a timely fashion, did not do it properly, or made petunious comments, he was punished. Punishment usually consisted of flogging or whipping with a rope.
Columbus also pleaded the fifth when I asked him if he tried to control the crew members. So we never got an answer if he actually did try to control them. So I never actually know if he wanted to control them. And also another thing that happened yesterday was that we found out that Columbus might have wasn't mentally stable because he was possibly diagnosed with syphilis. The defense is pleading that Columbus should be declared insane for the syphilis disease, skin-on-skin contact, that no one really knows for sure that it even existed during that time. But I'd like to point out that the days before, Columbus was alert and vibrant and open, and only yesterday was when he was actually starting to act crazy. So is this the last resort to get out of being sent to jail or given the death penalty? Of course, they mentioned that he wasn't answering correctly, but still, on the seventh day was when he actually, it felt more like he was actually starting to act insane. And if Columbus is insane, wouldn't everything he stated before during the trial be incompetent or invalid? He would have had the disease for a really long time. And I remember during our cross-examination with Columbus, it ended early because he was sick. And that was the question that I never got an answer to.
Ladies and gentlemen, the man that stands before you is an insane mass murderer, liable for the lives of thousands. Columbus, in his pursuit for gold and other riches, sought to enslave the local population when he knew that his vain search for gold was over, or to requote, it was futile. During his time in the New World, he perceived himself as the most powerful man in the world. And really, that is, I think, one of the key topics during Columbus' time in the Americas, was he knew that he was the most powerful man alive. He was the captain of the ship, and this was a new world where he was armed with the best weapons, had the best medical care, and he came from much more highly advanced developed civilization. And he knew that because he was the leader of that ship, that the foremost authority was him, and everything went through him. And what went down was atrocities committed and innocent lives being murdered.
Okay, thank you. That's all we have.